Hello, everyone. This is Hossein Mokhtarzadeh, and you're watching my program on strategy. The world is changing rapidly, so we probably need to adjust our strategies to achieve our goals in life and our careers. That's why ask experts about their strategy during and after pandemic. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Sandra Kentish to you. Professor Kentish is head of the School of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering and Redmond Berry Distinguished Professor at the University of Melbourne. Professor Kentish has broad interest in industrial separation, particularly the use of membrane technology for energy, food, and water applications. She has won several awards. Professor Kentish was selected as one of Australia's most innovative engineers by Engineering Australia in 2017, and as a woman on influence by the Australian Financial Review in 2018. She was elected to the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering in 2019. Hi, Sandra. Happy International Women's Week in advance and welcome.
Thank you and welcome. And it's good to be here. Yep.
Awesome. Sandra, you have been to industry and academia. Can you tell us about your experiences in this, basically in the past? How can you find them different or they were like complementary?
They are quite different places to work in many senses of the word. In industry, the pressures are much more immediate. Things happen much faster and decisions are made that are predominantly related to financial considerations, although there's an increasing focus on things related to environment and safety. In the academic world, the timelines are slower. There's more time to think. We are still very busy. Most of us, I've probably never worked harder than I have in academia. Industry, the hours were shorter, if you like. I could actually have a life. Academia, we work many more hours, but it is a different pace. There is the deadlines tend to be week long or month long, whereas in industry there are often the requirements are that you have something done by 5 p.m. So they're quite different in structure. I'd also comment the thing I like about academia is somebody like myself, I essentially run my own business. So the where there is an alignment is comparing myself to a small business owner. I recruit for myself, I raise my own funds, I supervise my own people. In many sense, each academic runs their own business within the broader framework of the university, but with the advantage that if our business fails, the university props us up, if you like. So it's actually a fantastic environment from that point of view to operate within.
That's interesting. Basic explanation. So, do you miss anything about industry, or?
Um, well, probably not, because I still work very closely with industry.
Right.
So, I mean, in some ways, you miss some of the action, because it is a much faster environment, but not really. No.
So speaking, you talked about like differences and somehow similarities. So we see that there's a lot of push in terms of like interaction between industry and academia and universities, especially after pandemic. So how do you assess that? Where are we now?
We're improving slowly the way academics relate to industry, but it is still very patchy. I know within my own school, we work very hard on building those interactions. Some people get it and therefore the interaction is strong. Other academics still, particularly if they've never been exposed to industry, tend to find that relationship quite difficult to manage. And there are issues on both sides, getting companies to understand the way they can use us appropriately, the way that we can build collaborations within that framework of having to do things very quickly. So there are mechanisms where that works well, through the CRCs is a good example, cooperative research centres, through things like the Biodesign Innovation Program that we run in biomedical engineering, where students actually interact directly with hospitals. So there are a range of ways we can increase that exposure and get people talking to each other. And once that's happening, things tend to go from there.
I think you mentioned something quite interesting in terms of pace. So of course, industry wants to get in. This is a business. They want to make money. They want to basically sell their products. If they join or collaborate with university that is not necessarily that high speed, high paced. So they want to do like research takes time. Research is not like 1 or 2 years project. So probably that's one of the challenging parts to get together with the industry because their perspective is quite different from people in universities, right? Or
Yeah, no, definitely. And part of the problem is universities are very risk averse. And so even if we want to work with a company, we're often slowed down by even getting legal agreements in place. So we can be quite cumbersome for a company to deal with when they're on short timeframes. Added to that is, as you're well aware, is if we apply for government funding through the Australian Research Council schemes, for instance, then there's often a delay of 6 months or more of the grant being assessed. And then, what can be extremely frustrating to a company is they can promise that they will put in, significant funds, $50,000, $100,000. They wait the 6 months and then the government says, no, we're not going to give you that grant. And we're back to square one. So there are some huge frustrations in working through those systems. Again, organisations such as the CRCs or using direct research contracts get around some of those issues where there's already procedures in place to allocate funds fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think there's a big discussion in this area. Even when you were talking, you just reminded me of even our graduates or people who graduate and want to go to industry or even stay in academia. They see these delays. So even in academia or university, it takes time to really get a position. But for them in an industry, it could be in a matter of like days or weeks that things happen.
Yeah, although the recruitment processes in industry are not dissimilar to academia. So from that point of view, I don't think there's too much difference. Obviously, getting a job in academia is difficult at the best of
Yeah.
times. But at the moment, it's also quite difficult getting a position in industry. So, yeah.
Speaking of getting a job, what would you recommend to your own students, graduates, and even like PhDs or postdocs? How would you, if they come to you, like you hired them, you said this is your own business, right? So how would you see them in terms of their career? How would you help them in a sense?
You mean how would I help them get a job, or how would I help
Yeah,
them do
because
well?
it could be both because if they do well here with you, probably they can get a not necessarily, but I mean,
Yeah.
like maybe their career. Let's talk about like their out of university career.
Um, Again, it's something I do quite a lot of. And the first comment is network, network, network. You need to be out there meeting people. You need to develop all those connections, and that will help you both get your next job, but also within your current position. There's some huge number of jobs that are never advertised that are essentially given to somebody because they happen to be in the right place at the right time. But you've got to put yourself in that position. So joining local societies such as Engineers Australia, Institution of Chemical Engineers, and then attending their events, but also just getting out and about. Within chemical engineering, whenever a student goes on an internship, we assign an academic to that internship, and that gives the academic tremendous exposure to that company. So even those types of approaches where you're deliberately getting people to engage with outside their comfort zone. So that's sort of probably one of my pieces of advice. In terms of actually accepting a job or where you're going, I think the other thing is to rely very much on your gut feel. Companies have different cultures, different environments, and when you're being interviewed for a position, if you don't feel comfortable that this is the company for you, then there's probably something wrong with their culture that it's not going to suit you and you should steer clear. So that's probably two of the pieces of advice I give to
Definitely.
people. Yeah.
Excellent. Because at the end of the day, you want to work with people. So that's if you like to work with people, and those are what you feel like, as you mentioned, your gut feeling is telling you, yeah, this is the right place. Maybe that's exactly the right place. We're getting close. Like next week is National Women's Week, and we still know that there's gender bias in engineering. So how do you assess that?
Um, yeah, look, it's a tricky situation, and I think it's an area that you've got to tread very carefully in. There are fewer and fewer women entering engineering at the moment because there are fewer studying hard physics, chemistry, mathematics at high school, and that's quite disappointing. And so it's not a situation that's going to change. I'm aware as well, I've had reports back from some of my own recent students that entering the workplace still has its challenges for girls, for women. Being told you only got this job because you're a woman is not something anyone wants to hear, but is still something that can happen out there. And so there's a balance there because, again, if you have too much positive discrimination, and you see many of the major companies now clearly favouring female appointments, then that can be quite damaging if the person feels that they've been given the position, or if the people around them feel they've been given the position because they're a female. So it's a balancing act. We do want to improve obviously want to improve the workplace. So the workplace operates much, much better if there is a gender balance than if it is all male or substantially male. But we don't want to be in a position where we expose the women who are going into those industries to bad behaviour or to practices where they feel isolated.
Sure, sure. I'm sure when you were actually going through your career, um, you have had some basic disappointing probably moments, right? Do you remember anything that then you actually found a solution for it? Maybe that can help the new generation.
From the gender point of view, if you talk from the gender point of view, the first comment I would be, I was in a fantastic position where it was not discussed. There was no discussion of gender bias or of anything like that. And so you just got on with the job and did it. You didn't expect to be treated favourably or even equally. And so at the time, it was just something you dealt with. And I think it actually made it much easier in some respects because there was no pressure on you necessarily to meet any particular expectations. I mean, there were some fascinating stories I could tell if you talk along those lines. When I was at Kodak, I was a production supervisor in charge of 18 men, and we operated in the dark, literally, because we were
right.
film, and that obviously had its challenges.
Interesting, yeah.
So there's things you can talk about, but I don't think they're necessarily the things we should focus on. I think you go into the workplace, you operate as best you can, and I don't think there's huge negatives or positives about the gender side of it.
Yeah, it would be amazing if our workplace is everywhere. Basically, we don't even think about such a thing. So we are team, we're working regardless of our gender, race, or all these superficial differences, basically. Because at the end of the day, if you look at it through the lens of, let's say, X-ray or MRI, we are all pretty much very close, very similar to each other, right? From that point, like micro level or tissue level. So speaking of industry, because this is something that's, let's talk about like a pandemic. Last year around this time, it was just explosion. Basically, we were all under a lot of pressure. I'm sure you all were. How do you see that from like exactly last year this time till now? How the whole university and your perspective changed since the beginning of pandemic?
Oh, the university's changed dramatically, as you're well aware. I mean, the first few months, it was all about how do you move. We essentially did 10 years of work in moving to teaching online in 2 weeks. It was just crazy. The work that we suddenly needed to do to be able to flip our teaching from being classroom based into a electronic type of environment. I think we are at a tipping point now where we need to move back from that. I think if universities are going to survive, we have to focus on face-to-face teaching. So there is now a need to really restore that balance. As you're well aware, knowledge itself is free. You can hop on the internet and find out any fact that you need to know. So universities have to be offering something different, and that needs to be skills development, teamwork, networking, again, getting to know other students of your age and similar interests, and those networks then will persist throughout your career. So for us, it's a matter of now moving back to a balance of, there'll always be some now online teaching, we've established that, but rebuilding that face-to-face.
Uh, I understand that, yeah, universities would like to have, face-to-face. Basically, students also want to have like interactions. That's really very helpful. But one thing that's we can see is even big companies like, let's say, Facebook, Google, they are coming to teaching as well, training. You can see that like Google has huge, and they actually share a lot of things online and for free. It's basically, of course,
Yes.
they make money using those when you use them and use their technologies. I mean, how do you see, you talked about survival. So how do you think the university with the traditional methodologies and these giant big companies, that if they start coming here, how do they compete, or do they need to compete at all?
Well, I think again, it comes down to the fact that those companies will tend to offer training online. They won't tend to offer it face to face. So that's, again, it comes back to that argument that we need to build an environment where students feel that they've got an on-campus experience, where they have developed skills, interpersonal skills, teamwork skills, practical hands-on learning. So particularly important in engineering, obviously, open-ended problem solving, all those things that you can't get from an online resource. Because you're right, Facebook and Google are offering, have got offerings in that space, and as do many other disciplines. Engineering itself, though, is a hands-on discipline. So we need to be encouraging those aspects of it if we are to survive. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. This is the area or era maybe that's needs a lot of creative thinking for um, one of the things actually that I think we talked a little bit before when I met you face to face, in terms of what other countries are doing for, let's say, people who are graduate. They're hiring nowadays. They don't just hire like bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. They just hire even PhDs or postdoc levels.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
slightly different from that, but then just continuation of our discussion. So something that I see here, like in Australia especially, that's not being appreciated. If you get like a PhD, then when the industry say, they don't even look at your resume. You may have difficulty getting a job.
Yes.
How
Yeah.
would you help them?
Yeah, no, you're right. And it is a problem in Australia, and it reflects the nature of our operations. The large companies we have tend to be internationally owned, and even where they are Australian owned, they no longer have their own research labs, which is quite disappointing. If you go back to, again, the 1980s, BHP had research labs, Orica had, or ICI had research labs. I worked myself within the Kodak research labs. Those places don't exist anymore within this country. And so there has been this shift away from focusing on picking up people with PhDs. And I think that's ultimately hugely detrimental to our country, because the people who do PhDs are the people who are extremely bright academically. And essentially all those really bright people now, if they do a PhD in Australia, they inevitably go overseas because of the lack of opportunity here in this country. And so we do have that classic brain drain effect, because we're not taking on these students. So we do need to address that. Another part of the problem there is that Australia has huge numbers of small to medium enterprises relative to other countries. And again, those companies struggle to take on research, if you like, or take on, use the impact that you can get from research. So it is a significant issue. Again, it's an issue that many companies are aware of, but don't necessarily know how to tackle. And so that's certainly something that we need to get better at, compared to particularly Europe, where PhDs are highly valuable, and the US, where somebody graduating with a PhD is snapped up by a company because of their expertise and their academic ability.
Exactly. Yes, I had my friends. I told you this before that one of them used to work in MathWork, the other one is in Facebook and Google. But the one in MathWorks told me that everyone in their division has got a postdoc. So basically, PhD and postdoc, and then MathWork, which is MATLAB. Basically, everyone uses it. They hired. But anyway, this is something that it would be amazing if we can do, because Australia, we are in a really good position even now in pandemic. So you see what's happening in the world, but here even without the vaccine just started, but we are quite okay. So maybe we are bringing nowadays. I'm hearing a lot about like global visa talent they bring. So, but. And I'm sure that you get a lot of emails in terms of, oh, what the job opportunities was. But it's unfortunate that there is a disconnection between, okay, we provide this and we try to bring talent, but we don't provide the facilities or infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's a real problem there. And look, within the Future Fuels CRC, which I'm working in, we're looking now at trying to develop more industrially focused PhDs so that we can help to bridge that gap and particularly make companies think about the value of PhD graduates. But there's a concern about how we make use of some of the best talents in the country, and get them working for the good of the nation.
Exactly, because they can actually. It doesn't mean that people who are bachelor or master, we're not comparing. It's about another level of basically education that they can, or impact that they can provide. So thank you very much, Sandra. I think we are around like 20, 30 minutes we are talking. Anything else that you would like me to ask you, but I didn't?
No, not particularly.
You wanted to share it because everyone will watch this hopefully online, or in advice or anything, especially in the area of industry, and because you have a lot of experience in that, both interaction of the academia and the industry. And we all know that's very important for Australia now to really, we see there's a lot of like initiative into manufacturing. There's like billions of dollars sometimes in being allocated. Um, but at the end of the day, we see that, okay, our PhDs or people who can make a difference, they really suffer. So
Yeah,
maybe.
no, I know. And I think if I can conclude, if anything, we need work on both sides. So
Yeah.
the academic world needs to understand better the pressures of industry and the shorter timelines, but also the much more applied nature of the work. If I have another criticism, it's that academic research is becoming more and more esoteric, more and more ivory tower, if you want to put it that way, because there's been this focus on metrics, particularly the number of journal papers that you can produce. And that's led to this proliferation of research that is published in high-ranked journals, but never read by anybody outside of academia. So we somehow need to shift that balance and get the academic world working on more applied research that is much more directly relevant to what's going on in Australia, and not designing novel materials that are completely impractical for the workplace. So we do need that push from academia to shift the dial back towards working more closely on applied research. And at the same time, companies need to understand the constraints on academics, the longer time frames, and how to engage. So there's a whole heap of things that need to be done. None of them are straightforward,
Of
but
course.
there is opportunity there to become much closer.
Yeah, this actually shows that how much opportunities out there. Of course, when it seems to be scarce, but these, because of, if we start the dialogue in an interactive way, then you see that there's how much opportunities are there for both sides, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much, Sandra. It was great talking to you. Great information, and happy International Women's Week again. And yeah, thanks for taking your time in very busy schedule. Have a wonderful day.
Yep, that was good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.